At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. At that time, if you would like to ask a question, you may press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Rachel Kraft. You may begin.
Hello and welcome to today's teleconference on the radiation science payloads flying on NASA's Artemis 1 mission. I'm Rachel Kraft with NASA's Office of Communication, Human Exploration in Deep Space, and demonstrate our commitment and capability to extend human existence to the Moon and eventually Mars. The agency rolled out the Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft to the launch pad overnight last night, and NASA is currently targeting Monday, August 29th as the first opportunity to launch Artemis 1. Today you'll hear from people involved in radiation science investigations flying as secondary payloads during the mission. Some are CubeSats, small satellites about the size of a shoebox that will ride inside an adapter ring on the rocket and be deployed after Orion is flying on its own towards the Moon. We'll also hear about 2 payloads flying inside Orion on its trek around the Moon and back to Earth. We have a few experts lined up to talk to you today about these investigations. They are Ramona Gaza, MARE Science Team Lead at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Thomas Berger, MARE Principal Investigator with the German Aerospace Center, Charit Schwartz, AstroRad Product Director with the company StemRad, Zhang, Plant Biology Program Scientist with NASA's Biological and Physical Sciences Program, Sergio Santamaria, Lead Scientist for the CubeSat BioSentinel with NASA's Ames Research Center, and Mihir Desai, Principal Investigator for the CubeSat CUSP with the Southwest Research Institute. We'll have a few opening comments from each of our speakers, and then we'll take questions from reporters on the phone line. Reporters can enter star 1 on your phone to be entered into the question queue at any time. And with that, we'll first hear from Ramona Gaza. Ramona?
Hello, everyone. Really glad to be here today with all of you and share some insight into the radiation environment challenges pertinent to human space exploration outside low Earth orbit. I'm Dr. Ramona Gaza, a physicist with the Space Radiation Analysis Group at Johnson Space Center and working on protecting our crew from space radiation. My duties here include project management for the NASA Crew Active Dosimeter, the new generation Crew 1 detector for Artemis 2 and beyond, and Human Health and Performance Science Team Lead for the Matryoshka Astrorad Radiation Experiment, or MARE, a secondary payload on Artemis 1. In a moment, you will hear from other scientists and engineers on the call today who are leading out investigations that will provide valuable insight and further our knowledge and understanding about the effects of deep space radiation. First, I'll just give you a few words on the environment and biological effects. Throughout its journey to the Moon and back, the Orion vehicle is left without the inherited protection of the Earth's magnetic field and is subject to the omnipresent galactic cosmic rays and the intense Van Allen radiation belts. This will result in an increased risk to the crew. When it comes to biological effects, different organs have different susceptibilities to space radiation. Understanding these effects is very important for successful and sustainable human space exploration efforts in deep space. Therefore, the uncrewed Artemis 1 flight offers this unique opportunity for scientific studies ranging from developing a detailed radiation dose mapping for different human body organs, the MARE payload, understanding the effects of space radiation on living organisms, including yeast and fungi, the BioExperiment 1 payload, developing a biosensor instrument to detect and measure such effects, the BioSentinel payload, and using deployable CubeSats equipped with instruments to study space weather effects in the interplanetary space and their impacts on Earth, the CUSP payload. Last but not least, I would like to mention the 3 purposeful passengers inside Orion. Probably most of you heard yesterday's telecon that touched on the Munikin Commander Camp Post, who will sit in the commander seat and is equipped with sensors to provide data on what future Artemis astronauts may experience on their trip to the Moon. Campos will be joined by 2 Phantom torsos, The MARE passengers, called Helga and Zohar, will be each equipped with a multitude of detectors to determine the radiation risk to the crew. So before moving on to hear more details on the secondary payloads, I would like to emphasize one more time the importance of strong partnership and collaboration with NASA's international partners, research institutions, and the commercial sector. Looking forward to our joint efforts in the future. With this, I will pass it off to Thomas. Thomas, please.
Yes. Thanks, Ramona. I'd like to welcome you all here today for this very exciting mission. My name is Dr. Thomas Berger. I'm a physicist at the German Aerospace Center in Cologne. I work in the radiation biology department, and I'm the principal investigator for the MARE experiment. And as Ramona already pointed out, with the NASA Artemis 1 mission, we are heading out into free space, so we're leaving the protection of the Earth's magnetic field, and we're traveling into a more harsh radiation environment. And to gather information about the radiation risks on humans, we are going to fly the MARE experiment as part of one of the secondary payloads inside the Orion crew module. MARE consists of two female anthropomorphic phantoms, so phantoms which reassemble a human. And the advantage of having female phantoms is that we are capable of placing radiation detectors at distinct points in each of the phantom to determine how much radiation is received within the relevant organs. So, for example, we will place over 6,000 small radiation detectors in each of the two phantoms, which will enable us at the end to get a three-dimensional distribution of the radiation dose received by these two phantoms on their way to the moon and back. In addition, the phantoms will be equipped with battery-powered radiation detectors from NASA and from the German Aerospace Center. And the question is, why do we have two phantoms? We have one phantom which is called Helga, and we have another phantom which is called Zohar. They are in principle identical twins, but Zohar will wear, in addition, a radiation protection vest. And this radiation protection vest is provided by the Israel Space Agency, funding StemRad as a company. So we'll have one so-called unprotected phantom flying in Orion, and the second phantom, Zohar, will be protected with this radiation vest. So we'll use, in principle, the possibility to have these two phantoms in Orion to test not only or to measure not only the radiation load they will receive, but to test also possible new radiation protection measures. And as Ramona already pointed out, this is an experiment which is done in international collaboration between NASA, Lockheed Martin, the Israel Space Agency, StemRad, and the German Aerospace Center, in addition with a lot of contribution from universities from all over the world. And this emphasizes that we have to work together to gain new knowledge, especially to bring astronauts safe back to the moon, to the moon and back. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to hand over to Shirit.
Thank you, Thomas. It is a pleasure working with you and the DLR team. It's indeed an extraordinary collaboration on this project, and I feel really privileged to take part of it. So I will be speaking about the AstroRad. The AstroRad vest is a personal protective wearable equipment that shields the astronauts from radiation during solar particle events, also known as solar storms. And storms in space can last for days and even weeks. So the AstroRad could potentially enable the crew to perform the daily activities even during a solar storm while being protected by the vest. The MARE experiment's main goal is to evaluate the effectiveness of the AstroRad vest in protecting the astronauts from solar energy particles. And as Thomas mentioned, it will be done by comparing the radiation values absorbed by Zohar, protected by the vest, to those of Helga. The inner unique protective cores are made of thousands of high-density polyethylene-made hexagons. The hexagons are connected to form a solid and yet flexible structure. This unique design allows for flexible movements and comfort of the user. The polyethylene material was chosen since it's high in hydrogen, and hydrogen is the most effective element for shielding charged particle radiation like solar protons. The vest also uses the selective shielding principle, which means more protection over sensitive organs. And our aim is to maximize the protection of critical organs while optimizing for weight. I will also add that the request to design the astronaut vest for women came from NASA, as women in generally have a higher risk of developing cancer since they have more radiation-sensitive organs such as breast tissue and ovaries. And based on the results of two experiments currently being conducted, ergonomic and the radiation, we'll be able to finalize the design and provide optimal and comfortable protection for astronauts, and hopefully the astronaut vest can enable continued exploration of deep space while maintaining crew health. Thank you for listening, and I will pass it on to Yi.
Yeah, thank you. And then I'm so glad to be able to be here and introduce our payload. So our payload, the name is Biological Experiment 01. One of the focus areas for the Biological and Physical Sciences program is to enable humans to thrive in deep space. As we prepare to return to the moon and eventually onto Mars, we must understand the combined effects of deep space radiation, stressors, radiation, like elevated ionizing radiation, altered gravity, and altered atmosphere. We want to understand more the effect of these stressors on living systems like humans, small organisms, and plants. So investigations aboard Artemis missions will help us develop future countermeasures, identify strategies to develop sustainable crops, and gain scientific advancements that will ensure crew health and productivity. Additionally, research using model organisms could help us understand the genetic and protein pathways attributed to better survival in harsh environments on Earth, and contribute to agricultural and biomedical advancements. So the Biological Experiment 01 payload will serve as a pathfinder for future biological research beyond low Earth orbit, with 4 investigations using 4 different model organisms, including plant seeds, fungi, yeast, and algae, aboard the Artemis 1 Orion capsule around the moon and return to Earth. So these investigations will help elucidate gene and protein pathways that promote robustness in the environment of deep space, and also learn how we can better thrive in deep space for future missions to the moon and Mars. Now I gave a little bit, details or highlights for each individual investigation. So the first one is the view to Mars. The PI of this investigation is Dr. Timothy Hyman from Duke University. So this project is to identify genes and gene pathways in algae, Chlamydomonas, that convey the best survival advantage during exposure to the combined impacts of space radiation and microgravity. And to select parent strains for future studies to optimize generation of hydrogen and potential fuels and other applications for deep space. The second project is Life Beyond Earth, effect of spaceflight on seeds with improved nutritional value. The PI is Dr. Federica Brandisi from Michigan State University. This project is to understand the impact of beyond LEO, beyond low Earth orbit spaceflight, on amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, and critical nutrients in Arabidopsis zhang. So the third one is led by Dr. Zhang from Naval Research Laboratory to investigate, to determine the physiology and molecular pathways responsive to space flight using Aspergillus niger, a group of microorganisms commonly found in spacecraft. The title is Investigating the Roles of Melanin and DNA Repair on Adaptation and Survivability of Fungi in Deep Space. So the last investigation, but not the least, is Deep Space Radiation Genomics. The PI is Dr. Luis Zia from University of Colorado Boulder. This investigation is pioneering scientific discovery by correlating which genes provide yeast cells with a higher probability of survival and the types and doses of radiation experienced beyond Earth's protective magnetosphere. Hope the missions will be successful. Thank you so much for your attention. Now I would like to pass it off to Sergio.
Thank you, Jay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and for supporting Artemis 1. My name is Sergio Santamaria, or Sergio, if you want to try your Spanish. I'm very happy to be here with you. I'm so excited to see the rocket finally on the launch pad. Earlier, Ramona gave a brief overview of the space radiation environment. However, there is still a lot that we do not know about what will happen to biology when exposed to cosmic or solar radiation in deep space. This, of course, as highlighted by Yi, not only applies to humans, but all other life forms that will support future space exploration, such as plants and a variety of microorganisms. NASA's BioSentinel mission will perform the first long-duration biology experiment in deep space. Among the 10 CubeSats currently sitting underneath Orion, BioSentinel is the only one carrying biology. The mission has two primary objectives. One, to develop the first instrument capable of sustaining biological life in deep space, and second, to investigate the biological response to the deep space radiation environment. For this purpose, we selected the yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae, commonly known as budding or brewer's yeast, the same one we use to make bread or beer. This model organism, while very simple, shares many processes with human cells, particularly on how they repair DNA damage. Are there any other particular reasons why we selected yeast? Sure. Besides being used extensively in fundamental and biomedical research, it has been flown to space many times. It is easy to manipulate genetically, and most importantly, it can be dried and kept alive for a long time in this state, just like the yeast you buy at the grocery market. Our CubeSat carries two scientific instruments: a fluidic-based system named biosensor, which delivers nutrients to rehydrate the yeast once BioSentinel reaches its orbit around the sun. The yeast cells will be activated at different time points throughout the 6-month nominal mission. This instrument tracks cell activity using an optical detection system. The second instrument, a radiation spectrometer, will quantify the amount of space radiation and identify the types of particles hitting the CubeSat. And this information will be correlated to the biological response. Thus, BioSentinel aims to fill critical knowledge gaps about the effects of the deep space radiation environment on biology by using a very simple microbial organism. We hope that we can extrapolate our results to human biology and inform on potential countermeasures for future crew missions. Furthermore, these effects will be compared to data obtained on board the International Space Station and on the ground. Finally, our team will be at Kennedy Space Center for the exhibit in preparation for launch, so feel free to reach out and chat with us. Now I would like to introduce Mihir Desai, who is the principal investigator for the CAS mission from SURI.
Thank you, and hello everyone. As introduced, just now. I'm Dr. Mihir Desai. I'm a physicist at Southwest Research Institute. I'm the principal investigator of the CUSP mission, which is spelled out as CubeSat mission to study solar particles. My research focus has been on understanding the solar wind and space physics, with a particular focus and emphasis on understanding the origin and acceleration of charged particles. These are ions and electrons in solar explosions known as solar flares and coronal mass ejections. I'm very excited and really glad to be here to tell you about the CubeSat mission, which will actually be launched in a heliocentric orbit, just like all the planets, far away from the Earth's magnetic field, to study the origin and causes of not just solar energetic particles, but also space weather. Just to give you a little bit of brief introduction, the CubeSat mission to study solar particles was developed in partnership between NASA and the Southwest Research Institute, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and the Jet Propulsion Lab. It will really orbit our sun, where it will be monitoring inbound radiation and ultimately help us better understand space weather. It will also be heliophysics' first CubeSat to be placed in a sun-centric orbit. Let me tell you a little bit about space weather. Space weather is, you heard a little bit about radiation, galactic cosmic rays, and other effects earlier. But space weather is a set of conditions in the region very close to Earth, and it's the presence of electromagnetic radiation and charged particles emitted from the sun, and that's what I'm talking about. There is the galactic cosmic rays, which are extrasolar system material that streams in from outside our sun's influence. But I'm focusing here on just the effects from the sun. And as you heard, this also affects human activity and technology. Space weather from the sun comes in three forms: X-rays and gamma rays from solar flares, the charged particles or radiation, particular radiation from solar flares, and finally space hurricanes known as coronal mass ejections that hit the Earth and interact with the Earth's magnetic field and cause what is known as geomagnetic storms. Space weather can produce these electromagnetic fields and induce extreme currents in wires, disrupt power lines, even cause widespread power outages. Space weather can also cause radio blackouts, solar radiation storms, and geomagnetic storms, as I said. Space weather can affect astronauts, in particular airline crew serving on polar routes, can reach their annual dose limits during a solar storm in one polar flight. And we've known airlines to divert their flights from directly, say, from New York to Hong Kong, and causing delays and extra fuel. Unfortunately, even after studying the particles for over 50 years or so, we still don't understand how solar particles are produced. CUSP mission is equipped with 3 state-of-the-art miniaturized instruments to measure particles from the sun and shed light on 3 critical problems that have really hampered our understanding of how the sun, in other words, flares and coronal mass ejections, accelerate particles to very high energies and increase radiation hazards near Earth. The first question is, what is the material that is accelerated? How exactly is this material selected and accelerated to higher energies? And finally, how does the material travel to Earth? As I said, CUSP is equipped with 3 state-of-the-art instruments that address all of these 3 questions. There's the superthermal ion sensor from Southwest Research Institute that studies what is the material that is being accelerated. There is the MERIT sensor, which stands for the Miniaturized Electron and Ion Telescope from Goddard Space Flight Center, which actually measures the higher energy particles that cause the radiation, increase the radiation hazards near Earth, and tell us how these particles are accelerated to very high energies. And finally, we have the vector helium magnetometer from Jet Propulsion Lab, which measures the solar magnetic fields, the interplanetary magnetic fields, along which these particles travel and tell us how these particles get to us in the first place. Unfortunately, as we go through this, our current ability to predict the impact of these solar events is very primitive. It's like our ability to predict weather in the 1940s. We have 1 or 2 isolated weather beacons in the Pacific to predict what the weather would be like in New York. It just doesn't work that way. And our knowledge about space weather effects and causes has come from science missions that are scattered in the interplanetary medium. What we need is a distributed constellation of measurements in order to observe the spread of these particles at various locations so that we can feed these into the models and make accurate predictions of how they can impact our technology and human activity in low Earth orbit and beyond. So CUSP, in some sense, is a forerunner or a pathfinder to a potential constellation of low-cost CubeSats that can make such measurements in a very cost-effective fashion and serve as a pathfinder for future space weather research monitors. So yeah, once again, I'm very excited to be here, and I think I'm the last speaker here, so I will give the floor to Rachel to conclude my speech here. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. We will now begin the question and answer portion. I do want to also note that we have Russell Lane with us as well. Russell is the payload integration lead for the Space Launch System program, and he can address any questions that there may be about CubeSats at a high level that our science-focused participants can't answer. So again, you can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the question queue at any time. Your phones are on mute now, and the operator will open your mic when we're ready for your question and close your mic after you ask your question. We ask that you please stick to one question, and given that we have a number of speakers on today, please identify to whom your question is directed. And if we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask a second question. And we'll take our first question from Alexandra Witz with Nature Magazine.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. It's for Ramona Gaza. I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more broadly about gender differences in radiation risk throughout the Artemis program. So Artemis 1, of course, will be uncrewed, but as we move into crewed flights, maybe having astronauts at Gateway, having extended lunar surface operations, how much do we know about the increased risk that women experience in the space environment, and especially beyond the Van Allen belts, and what research still needs to be done to better quantify how vulnerable women astronauts are, in particular, non-male astronauts on the surface?
Hi, Alexandra. Sure. Let me try to give you a little bit of overview of how we do things on the International Space Station. So for the International Space Station, we have our limits based on the 3% risk in the risk of dying from a cancer caused by radiation exposure. And we have different limits based on gender and age on the International Space Station. Now, moving towards Moon and Mars, we are trying to consolidate those limits. And based on a recent report by the U.S. National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine that was released in June, we are encouraged to proceed in adopting a new standard that limits all astronauts, men and women, to a 600 millisieverts of radiation over their career. Now, when doing so and looking into developing this number, this threshold, we did look on allowing, with the new proposed standard, a limit that's valid for all astronauts, however, is based on what's allowable for a 35-year-old woman. So we are looking at a more conservative approach while we are making this uniform across the population. Moving outside low Earth orbit, definitely more studies are needed, and you heard a little bit about our biological studies happening. So as we explore space further, we hopefully would be able to gather more information on the differences. However, moving forward, this unified limit, we hope will address conservative concerns about the risks of both women and men in space.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Lisa Grossman with Science News.
Hi, thanks for this. This is for Thomas or Shirit. I was wondering why these human sources are called phantoms, and where did Helga and Zohar get their names?
Yes, Thomas, yeah. Could you please repeat the question, because it was a little bit not loud enough.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yes.
Why are they called phantoms, And how did Helga and Zohar get their name?
Okay. Okay, I'll answer the scientific question first. The phantoms we are using, or Helga and Zohar, they are in principle based on phantoms which are used on Earth for radiation treatment planning in hospitals. So if you work on cancer treatment plans in hospitals, you use phantoms which are so-called anthropomorphic phantoms, which reassemble in principle a human body. So both for Helga and Zohar, they are made out of different materials, out of epoxy resin, which different substitutes to really reassemble like human bones, human lung tissue, human brain tissue. So in principle, the phantoms are tissue equivalent in this sense. So that means if you have radiation passing through the phantoms, the interaction of these radiations are similar to the interaction of radiation passing through a human body. That's why they are called anthropomorphic phantoms. So they are actually based or come from cancer therapy applications. And since we are talking about space radiation, and you know, in cancer therapy, you also use protons or carbon ions to treat cancer, and the radiation field in space also has these proton ions and these carbon ions. It's a little bit more complicated, but in principle, we just translate these medical phantoms into space. Concerning the names, well, as far as I know, for Zohar, since Zohar is the Israel phantom, there was a naming convention or naming, naming ideas to find out the name for Zohar, and at the end Zohar came up, and I think Zohar is an Hebrew name, and it means actually, I think in English, radiant. So that's actually quite fine. And Helga was the same. I mean, Helga is a very typical, let's call it, German name for the phantoms.
Okay, thank you. We'll take our next question from Elizabeth Howell with space.com.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for finding time in this busy situation. I was wondering if representatives from each of the experiments could tell me what would constitute success and what would constitute we need to look at this harder situation when it comes to assessing radiation safety for humans. Like, is there a metric that you're looking for, a set of information? Like, how do we know whether it's going well or whether we need to be trying again?
And since that's a question for all the payloads, maybe we'll go in the initial order. So if someone from MARE wants to address that first.
Yes, I can try. So in principle, what we have from MARE is we have a lot of so-called passive radiation detector, over 10,000 embedded in the phantoms. So the success of the mission is, of course, we get the hardware back, we can read out all these passive radiation detectors, and then that will give us a so-called three-dimensional distribution of the radiation environment, which impinged on both Helga and Zohar. So in this sense, the mission success is when we get the hardware back, we read out the detectors combined internationally and get this three-dimensional distribution, and at the same time also see look into the protective measures of the asteroid west by comparing these three-dimensional distributions of the radiation dose. And then, of course, we have these so-called active radiation detectors on MARE, which are battery-powered. And, of course, for everything which is like powered, you hope that they survive the mission and that the readout afterwards will give you the data you, in principle, assumed you will get. So in this sense, getting everything back and then reading all the detectors out and then hoping that all of them, of course, worked would be the first of the mission success. And then we go to the science, and then we have to see what does the science tell us at the end. So that was very quick for MARE. Ramona, do you want to add something, maybe?
This is a good a good summary, Thomas, of what we expect to see from the radiation measurements. In addition, we will use this as a precursor of furthering out radiation studies on the biology aspect. This will give us the radiation physics information, and we will need more information and more studies on the biological effects from space radiation.
I can add that from the StemRad aspect, so success is getting high quality data, allowing us to assess the protection provided, and that combined with the ergonomic data from the ISS will inform us as to the operational readiness of the device.
So for the biological experimental one, before the launch, actually we have, for individual, we have 4 investigations. So individually we have the science success criteria, and then we kind of like the PI team will come here and do a set of experiments like a science verification test, and the experiment verification test using a simulated environment. So we have done a lot of tests beforehand to reduce the risk. Certainly, we want to have the mission, done successfully. So the key for this for biological experiments would be, bring the sample back alive. So, but in addition to that, each individual have their own endpoints, analysis endpoints. And then each individual experiment, so they have enough replicates. So if there are certain science laws during the flight, the PI's team would still be able to get enough biological samples to do analysis. So, and so the first step, mission success will be to bring samples back alive. And then the second step will be, we will evaluate, and then the PI will do the post-flight analysis, and then we go against those science criteria. And then no matter what, the PI team prepared to get some robust analysis. So no matter what, the science biological samples alive or have problem there, they will still be able to get valuable data from each individual experiment. So we will still get, a large data set that can give us information for future biological experiments for deep space.
Hi, Elizabeth. This is Sergio Santamaria from BioSentinel. You asked about what constitutes success, what is the criteria. In our case, we don't get our samples back, so we stay in a heliocentric orbit pretty much forever. The success criteria is defined by being able to detect a biological response due to the radiation environment beyond lower orbit. And this response we compare in multiple ways. Number one, with its own physical dosimeter, the cumulative dose of radiation and the type of radiation. Then being able to compare to its ground unit, and of course to our International Space Station payload that we completed that work a few weeks ago. So being able to detect those differences, and most importantly, over time. So we get perhaps the luxury of having a CubeSat for at least 6 months in deep space, reporting data via telemetry. As well, in terms of how do we know if it's going well or not? Well, we have constant over the multiple-month mission, and we have, it's a very complex microfluidic system, so we have a bunch of sensors that will tell us how everything is going from the radiation environment, the electronics, the biology, temperature, pressure, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Is it time for the cut?
Me.
I can't.
Yes, go ahead, me here.
Yeah, so we have a minimum mission requirement of getting measurements of at least about 3 months, and we are expecting to last longer than that. It'll just depend on how far we are away from Earth to communicate with it, as alluded to earlier. Our major objective, science objective, is to simply advance our understanding of how these solar energetic particles that cause radiation hazards near Earth's orbit are accelerated. And in order to do that, we need to the material that's being accelerated, to how it's being accelerated and how it gets to us. So if we can observe, several the solar activity is picking up, sunspot cycle is starting to produce more and more solar explosions on the sun. So we expect to see quite a few solar energetic particle events where we can make that connection. So that's the first science objective. The second objective is, of course, we have an instrument on board that is brand new, has never been flown before, never been tested in space, and we have miniaturized it in this for a CubeSat form factor, and what we're expecting to do is to increase its technological readiness level to the point where it will cost NASA a lot less to fly on a bigger mission with a bigger instrument. This instrument is actually a very important instrument for the future space weather missions, because up till now our lead time for predicting how big a geomagnetic storm can impact or can be caused in the Earth's environment is depending on measurements at the Lagrangian point L1 between Sun and Earth, and that gives about an hour warning. But CMEs, or coronal mass ejections, produce these shock waves, and these shock waves accelerate these low energy particles that can escape the shock itself and can be detected up to 24 hours ahead before the CME even comes to that L1 point. So if we are successful in this mission, we will be able to give Earth-based technologies and users up to a 24-hour warning with this type of instrument in that L1 Lagrangian point. So there are several metrics of success, and we want to be able to hit all of them in as long a mission as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marcia Smith with Space Policy Online.
Thanks so much. My question is for all of the scientists who are working on the gender differences that Alex was asking about initially in the radiation effects on women versus men. So Reed Weissman, the head of the astronaut office, has already said that NASA is no longer distinguishing between the male and female crew astronauts as in terms of radiation dosage. So I'm wondering if the results of these experiments are intended to change the design of Orion to provide better radiation protection, or to change what kind of protective equipment is on board Orion, including radiation vests or whatever, or is it to change the duration of the missions? Exactly how will this data be used, since the decision already apparently has been made that men and women will have the same radiation dosage limits?
Hi, Marsha, this is Ramona. I will take half of this question, of answering this question. So the purpose of MARE, the MARE project, is actually to measure the dose of different body organs inside the female phantom. So what we will get, besides the difference between a man and a woman when it comes to biological effects, we will get the difference between different body organs, difference between brain and uterus, for example, and other differences like that, or lung, or what are those differences. And of course, for the body organs that are common to both men and women, those relative differences in their response to space radiation will provide us with good information for both genders. So that's the purpose of the MARE project when it comes to studying body organs, right, and their susceptibility to space radiation. When it comes to the new limits being adopted, as I mentioned before, they are already being developed to look at the most conservative case, just to make sure we are not assuming risk that we may not be in a position to assume. and they are based on looking at the 35-year-old female limit, and you make it uniform for all. I hope this answers your question.
Okay, thank you. We'll take another question from Jim Siegel, nasatech.net.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm interested in the spacesuits that NASA introduced in the last year or two that were going to be used apparently on the Artemis program, and I was curious as to whether they've already been designed to take into account and to provide the necessary radiation protection for the astronauts. Thank you.
This is Ramona Gaza. I can try to take this question as well. So the space radiation, it's made of heavy charged particles and protons, as you heard from the previous discussions, and those particles are quite penetrating. So it's almost virtually impossible to use something like a thin shield of an EVA suit to protect from the space radiation environment. You need much more shielding, a particular type of shielding, low Z shielding, that will help us protect the crew.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Can I add something to that? So I think what we want to do is to be able to give early warning so that there's some shelters developed, let's say on the surface of the moon or inside the gateway or wherever the astronauts are working, so that they can take cover, as opposed to designing suits that could stop these penetrating particles. That's what I think Ramona is talking about. But I think the key is to have early warning predictions as to what might happen.
That is correct. Thank you for adding on to that. And the Orion vehicle is equipped with such shelter for crewed missions.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. This will be from Irene Klotz with Aviation Week.
Thanks, Rachel. I have one just kind of a clarification question for Ramona about the male-female radiation exposure. So, and I'm sorry if this sounds kind of blunt, but it seems that throughout all the history of the space program, at least since women were flying, there's been this acknowledgement that men are more resistant to the radiation environment than women just genetically. And there was a decision made to basically level how many missions or how much exposure men and women can get, even though men physically are capable of withstanding more radiation. Is that correct? And was that decision like purely in the vein of, I don't know, equality or flight opportunity equality? Or is there any science that actually was behind the decision to make the radiation exposure limit even for men and for women?
This was based on science as well, considering the fact that although we did have studies in the past that showed discrepancies in different responses between female and male to radiation, they are not necessarily, how should I phrase this, 100% accepted by all scientists. So there are scientists out there, and if you look through the press, I'm sure you'll find articles and mentions of these scientists that will say, yes, for sure, this is an important factor and it should be considered in crew selection. And there are biology radiation scientists out there that they will say there is not enough conclusive scientific evidence that you have a significant impact due to radiation between men and women. So putting all of this together, and looking forward to exploring outside low Earth orbit and looking forward at different approaches to make sure human exploration is possible and our crew is protected, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released this particular recommendation to NASA, and NASA is looking into adopting that recommendation, as you just said. And I think that's all I have about this particular one.
Okay, thanks, Ramona. Okay, I don't think we have any other reporters in the queue. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, especially our participants. You can find more about the payloads, including the ones discussed today and all of the other payloads flying on Artemis 1, as well as the rest of the mission at nasa.gov/Artemis-1. And I will note as well, we should have our launch coverage plans out soon, so a note to look for that as well. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.